Hey boys, it's HarmNone. Today we're going to be going over the top 10 fastest supercars in Grand Theft Auto Online in terms of lap time. Now this doesn't mean that these are the fastest cars in a straight line. This means these are the best cars around most racetracks in Grand Theft Auto Online. Depending on the track, some of these may be better than others. Generally they are pretty consistent with being a better overall vehicle the higher they are on the list. Anyway guys, we're going to start off with number 10. Alright guys, and at number 10 we have the Pegasi Zaruso. Now the Zaruso is the 10th fastest car in Grand Theft Auto Online around a track. This thing is really good. I personally don't really use the Zaruso very much. As you can see, my car is, well, relatively unupgraded, so you can kind of guess that I don't really use this thing very much. Haven't really customized it either, so how you see it in the video is not necessarily how it will perform when it is actually fully upgraded. However, this thing is quite good. Now also at number 10 we have the Devastate. The Devastate is better than the Zaruso on a track that heavily involves top speed because the Zaruso has a relatively low top speed, especially in comparison to the Devastate. Overall, I think the Zaruso handles a little bit better than the Devastate. However, the Devastate would be my preferred vehicle to actually race with. I had a Devastate for a few years and I used it in races quite a bit, and I can vouch for that car and say it is very good. Whereas the Zaruso, I cannot personally vouch for it. However, I have heard a lot of other people swear by this thing, so there you have it. Anyway guys, that is it for number 10. Let's move on to number 9. Alright guys, next up at number 9 we have the Overflawed Autark. This thing is pretty crazy. It's a really good car. I've actually owned one of these before, but I previously have sold it. However, I've just bought a new one just for this video to make it for you guys, so I'm pretty happy to have it again, honestly. Now the Autark is the 9th fastest vehicle in the game right now, as far as the supercars category goes. The Autark definitely handles pretty well. It accelerates decently. The top speed is not very high, but it's high enough. It'll get the job done on most tracks unless there are some really long straightaways. My one complaint with the Autark is it is a really light car, so I feel like you can kind of get bullied by other vehicles, especially in actual races. So you gotta watch out for that with the Autark. And if you plan on using the Autark in actual races, you are going to be at a pretty big disadvantage. This thing is definitely not the best car to race in. However, it's not the worst either. Obviously, it's the 9th fastest supercar in the game, so it's here for a reason. Anyway guys, that's it for number 9. Let's move on to number 8. Alright guys, next up at number 8 we have the Ocelot XA21. Now the XA21 is actually one of my favorite supercars in the entire game. It sounds absolutely incredible and it performs really nicely as well. It's also got a lot of really good customization options, which is another, cool feature for sure. On top of all of that, it also has an active rear spoiler, which I think is really cool. As you guys can see, when you slow down it retracts, and when you speed up it comes up. Super cool car. Like I said, sounds amazing, looks amazing. There's really not much to dislike about this car. And on top of all of it, it is the 8th fastest supercar in the entire game. This thing is actually pretty competitive in the supercars category, I have actually found myself. However, there are quite a few cars that are still better than this thing and will, kind of give this thing the gap, unfortunately. As much as I like this car, it's just not the fastest. However, if you want a decent supercar for just cruising around in online and that you can take into races and at least do pretty well, the Ocelot XA21 is a great option for you. This thing is absolutely incredible. I would highly recommend this car. Anyway guys, I think that's pretty much it for number 8. Let's move on to number 7. Alright guys, next up at number 7 we have the RE7B. This thing used to be the king of the supercars category for quite a long time, honestly. I remember racing with this thing when the Cunning Stunts DLC first came out, and the RE7B had a speed glitch that you could actually do with it. If you didn't equip it with bulletproof tires, it would go 180 miles an hour. It was absolutely cracked. I won a lot of races with it, and I didn't even do the glitch intentionally. I literally found out about it because I didn't put bulletproof tires on it, because I only intended to use it in races, and from that point on, I used it. And then of course Rockstar patched it, so that was gone pretty quick. But still, today, the RE7B is the 7th fastest supercar in the entire supercars category. Now the RE7B does kind of struggle in the corners. That is this thing's one downside. It is really fast, and it does actually have a lot of grip at super high speed. However, you can lose the tail end of this car when you're going at lower speeds through sharper corners, which is my one complaint with the RE7B, but it had to have something wrong with it, especially back in the day when this thing first came out. It was ridiculously overpowered. It was so damn good. Now, the RE7B is pretty much a certified race car in this game. I mean, it's got all the racing liveries, it's got crazy options for it that you can customize it with, albeit there's not that many. It is definitely a race car. I mean, you can't even deny it. It is just it. What else would it be? It's made to be a race car, and it still does its job even today. Coming in at number 7, it's not that bad, even by today's standards. Anyway, guys, that's it for number 7. Let's move on to number 6. Alright guys, at number 6 we have one of my favorite cars in the game these days, the Pegasi Ignis. This thing was added with the Contract DLC, obviously, as I'm sure many of you guys are aware, and it is an absolutely fantastic car. This thing looks absolutely incredible on the outside, and it is a very decent performer as far as the supercars category goes. For racing, this thing is one of the better cars you can use in the game. Obviously, coming in at number 6, it's really not that bad. This car is 4-wheel drive, which helps to give it extra good traction off the line, which of course is very nice for at the start of races. Of course, usually you get the boost, but still. Now the Ignis handles really well, it accelerates decently. The only thing that this thing doesn't do that well is top speed. Top speed wise, this thing is just, it's not the best. However, top speed a lot of the time really doesn't matter in most races. Don't get me wrong, there's some races where top speed matters more than anything else, but in most stunt races and most road circuit races, it's more acceleration and handling dominant, which is why this car is really good. Because those are the two things that this thing excels at. Handling and acceleration. And of course, looking absolutely incredible. Anyway guys, the Ignis comes in at number 6. This thing is fantastic. I would highly recommend picking this thing up. If you're interested in copying my customization, I do have a customization on my channel, so go ahead and search on YouTube for that if you guys are interested. Let's move on to number 5. Alright guys, next up at number 5 we have the Truffade Thrax. This is by far the best Truffade car in the entire game, and obviously it's the 5th best supercar in the entire game. Now my Thrax is unupgraded right now because I uncustomized this thing so that I could actually do a customization on it a few months ago, and I just never got around to it. So that is why this car looks very bare bones right now. It's because it has no upgrades on it. But don't get me wrong, it's still a very quick car even without upgrades. However, when you do upgrade this thing, it does become the 5th fastest supercar in the entire game. It's also one of the best looking supercars in my opinion that is as fast as it is. There's a lot of cars that are in the supercars category that they might not look that great, honestly. Obviously, it depends on your personal opinion. My personal preference, I really think the Thrax looks pretty incredible. Now, the Thrax has a ton of customization that you can do to it, which is of course a bonus because, I mean, we like to customize cars, let's not lie here. You can make this thing look super aggressive, you can make it look pretty tame. No matter what, it's going to look like a Batmobile, but you can pretty much change it to be however you like. Now the Thrax handles really nicely, also accelerates well, and it has a decent top speed. Again, not the best ever, but not the worst either. Overall, the Thrax is definitely a car that I would recommend picking up if you guys have some extra cash lying around and you don't have it already. Anyway guys, that is it for number 5. Let's move on to number 4. Alright guys, next up at number 4 we have the Ducati Wagner. Now the Wagner is a very awesome car in this game. The Wagner definitely benefits from an extreme amount of downforce, which is an awesome feature about this thing. Now again, with this car, I bought it for the video, so I didn't really have time to upgrade it. However, you're just gonna have to imagine that this thing is as good as I say it is, because trust me, it is really goddamn good. The Wagner actually has a pretty decent top speed. If I remember correctly, it's around 126 miles per hour, which is pretty fast in Grand Theft Auto Online. Now I know 126 doesn't sound like a lot, especially compared to real life terms. We know supercars that go almost 300 miles an hour. The Wagner's 126, if I'm remembering correctly, of course, is not that impressive. However, within GTA, that is a really decent top speed. Couple that with the Wagner's insane downforce that it has, and this thing is a force to be reckoned with on the racetrack. Due to its insane downforce, it does have really good handling when you start going a bit faster. At lower speeds, this thing does struggle a little bit because it is rear-wheel drive only. Be mindful of that for sure. However, just know that once you start going really fast, you are going to have a much better time with the Wagner. This car will definitely benefit you a little bit more on tracks that are top speed oriented, but of course, like I mentioned, it does have really good downforce and traction, so even on twisty circuits, it's also going to be really good. Overall, the Wagner is a really good all-around vehicle in this game in the supercars category, and it comes in at $1.5 million, which is not that much money in comparison to some of the other cars on this list. So if you're balling on a budget here, the Wagner might be the car for you. It's a really good car, looks pretty cool, looks really futuristic, it's pretty sick. Anyway guys, that's it for number 4, let's move on to number 3. Alright guys, and for the third fastest supercar in Grand Theft Auto Online, we have the ENUS S80RR. This thing is pretty sick. Now I gotta say the S80 is not my favorite car in Grand Theft Auto Online. I really don't like the look of this vehicle overall, but I can't deny just how good it is. This thing accelerates pretty decently well, and it also has pretty good downforce, so therefore it has pretty good handling at top speed. It is rear wheel drive only, very similar to the Wagner, so it's going to be kind of similar to that. However, I would say that this thing's acceleration is just better than the Wagner's. That's something to keep in mind. Overall, I think the Wagner's a better looking car, and the S80 is really not that much faster than the Wagner. Once you start going, this thing does have pretty crazy downforce and traction, which definitely gives it an edge over the Wagner in my opinion. I mean, it's not the best looking car, but it also is kind of a race car, so like it kind of is cool at the same time. As you guys can see though, this car has crazy downforce. Like when I'm going over these bumps, the car pretty much is glued to the road, which kind of tells you how much downforce this thing has. So definitely at top speed, this thing is going to have really, really good traction, really good handling, and also it's got a pretty good top speed as well. Overall, the S80RR is an absolutely fantastic supercar. You guys should definitely pick this thing up. However, it is not the most fantastic of all the supercars. So we're going to get into the top 2 right now. Alright guys, next up at number 2 we have the Benefactor Krieger. Now this car and the number 1 car are kind of interchangeable. Some people like the Krieger better, some people like the other car better. We're going to get to that one in a minute, but for right now let's talk about the Krieger. The Krieger is an absolutely fantastic race car in this game. It has a ton of customization options, which definitely is a nice feature to have with this thing. However, some customization options do actually help this thing, like the spoiler option, of course, which adds downforce, which makes this thing have better traction. Now, of course, this thing is 4-wheel drive, so it will have superior traction off-road and in slipperier conditions. Personally, I think the Krieger is the best supercar in the game. However, that opinion is not shared by everybody. A lot of people really like the car number 1 as their supercar of choice. That's absolutely respectable, and technically it is the better car. It also has really decent downforce for what it is. You wouldn't really expect this car to have crazy downforce because it doesn't really have an insane spoiler on it or anything, but it does have pretty decent downforce. So that definitely helps it to corner at really high speeds. Also, of course, because of the 4-wheel drive, it does have a really, really good launch. Perhaps one of the best launches in the entire game. This car is wicked fast, guys. I would highly recommend picking up the Krieger, although it is on the more expensive side. This thing is very, very close to $3 million in this game, which is a pretty hefty price to pay. However, for that price, you do, of course, get a top 2 supercar in the entire game, which is pretty darn good. Anyway guys, I think that is pretty much it for the Krieger. It's a pretty fantastic car. I definitely recommend this one, but let's just wait and see number 1 because I recommend that one honestly a little bit more. If you are newer to racing in Grand Theft Auto, I would recommend the Krieger more so than the car number 1. However, if you're a seasoned veteran, the car number 1 is just going to be better for you. Anyway guys, that is it for number 2. Let's move on to number 1. Alright guys, and the car number 1 is of course the Progen Emirates. This is regarded as being the best supercar in all of Grand Theft Auto Online right now. The reason for this is the Emirates has insanely good grip at high speeds. Now the Emirates is rear wheel drive only, however it does have insane downforce, very similar to some of the other cars that we've mentioned on this list before, so it has really, really, really good handling. The handling on this car is so responsive, it's very hard to actually crash this thing. My only complaint with the Emirates is the back end does occasionally slip out on you when you are going a little bit too fast. However, most of the time it is very controllable due to the large amounts of downforce that this thing actually has. Now, the Emirates has a pretty decent top speed, which definitely complements this car. Due to this thing being rear-wheel drive, I think Rockstar gave it a few extra buffs over the Krieger to give it an advantage on most road tracks. Now, the Krieger over this thing does definitely have a better launch, and it does definitely have better traction a lot of the time. However, the Emirates has insane amounts of downforce, which allow it to have really good traction most of the time, as long as you are going at a decent speed. If you are going said decent speed, this thing can pretty much take off on a Krieger every single time. If you get a good driver driving the Krieger, it will beat a bad driver in the MRS, and if you get a good driver in the MRS, it will beat a bad driver in the Krieger. If you have two good drivers, the cars will be pretty much neck and neck. It's really hard to say which one is actually genuinely faster. Both the Krieger and the MRS are my two top picks for cars on this list if you want a supercar that is going to be really competitive in supercar races in Grand Theft Auto Online. Both of these cars are absolutely fantastic. The MRS, in my opinion, does have better customization options than the Kriegers, so there is that to consider, especially if you like customizing cars a lot. Overall, both cars are absolutely fantastic. It is completely personal preference which one you actually like more. If you have enough money, I'd recommend buying both, trying them both, seeing which one you like better and selling the other, or simply going into a race and driving the unupgraded versions of these two cars and seeing which one you like better that way. That's a lot cheaper, so if you're struggling for money, that's what I would recommend doing. Anyway guys, that is it for the top 10 supercars in Grand Theft Auto Online. If you guys found this video useful or helpful at all, let me know in the comments down below. Leave a like as well if you enjoyed, dislike if you didn't, subscribe if you guys are new, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, take care. Peace.